Today, in our Lighthouse podcast, I have the pleasure to host Dr. George Dikaios, an adjunct lecturer and a researcher at the Department of Ports Management and Shipping at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens. He's also a senior research fellow at the UNESCO Chair on Climate Diplomacy. George's research interests revolve around climate policies and diplomacy, maritime transport policies, and sustainable blue development.
Dr. Dikaios is an adjunct lecturer and a researcher at the Department of Ports Management and Shipping at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, teaching EU maritime transport policies and blue growth and sustainability. He is also a postdoctoral researcher at the Department of Political Science and Public Administration of the same university, researching on EU green port policies and teaching part of the course Climate Diplomacy. George holds a PhD in Political Science and Public Administration, focusing on EU climate diplomacy and international transport.
George, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you very much. Very nice being here.
In 2023, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, in his opening remarks at the press conference on climate change, said that, and I quote, that the era of global warming has ended and that the era of global boiling has arrived. A couple of years earlier, he had used the terms climate crisis and climate emergency to showcase the urgency for action to be taken by everyone to combat climate change. Could you please explain to our listeners and viewers to what extent are climate changes a result of human actions? And is there a justified reason for worry, or do you think that the urgency to address climate change is, as some people claim, overblown?
Thank you for this question. Yes, so of course, we know, from years of research that climate change is happening. Climate change, as it has been defined by the United Nations, is the changes that we experience in our climate that are not compatible with what we knew before late 1800s. So we know, and we have research results that show that after certain human activities that emit greenhouse gas emissions, climate started changing. Climate would change one way or another, but we created this more rapid change on climate. So it's definitely a human action result. But, this is, and is it something to worry? Yes, it is, of course. We see every day the differences in the weather, which can be the best example of how we can experience climate change. But we also have other results of climate change, such as the sea level rising or the ice melting, and they are not connected. This is something that a lot of people think about, that ice melting and sea level rise are connected, but they are not immediately. Of course, they are at some point, but not necessarily.
One is not a direct consequence of the other.
Yes,
to say, right? Yes.
And so, do we have to worry about it? We do, in some extent. This is very difficult. I think, and I always say this, that we figured out that climate change poses a lot of challenges in our everyday life, but we are not yet ready to find the solutions, because we still live in an era that we want to make our lives easier or more wealthier, etc. So we haven't found yet the way to stop growing, to stop the growth business as usual, without emitting greenhouse gas emissions. So my answer to that, to if we need to worry, is that yes, we need, especially now that more and more people enter. Let me use this verb: enter in the Western way of life. I mean, with more products, with having more chances to travel, etc., etc. So more people will emit more and more.
Yes, some people even say that growth as we know it is not at all compatible with combating climate change effects. But
yes, this is true. I mean, at least for now, research shows that the way growth goes, is not compatible with the fight against climate change.
So if we establish this causal link between human actions and climate changes, we see, you talked about the effects of these climate changes, we see a direct link between global warming and natural disasters, for example. So can you maybe give us a concrete example on how this global warming affects and possibly causes these natural disasters?
Yes. Well, I'm not a physicist, so I'm not maybe I'm not the perfect fit to answer this question. But of course, I know several things. I'm a political scientist by training, but I'm working on how we can implement climate policies. So of course, I know some examples. Let me take an example from Greece. So we experienced this summer and the previous summer terrible fires that we couldn't extinguish, and maybe the reason is that the temperature has risen so much. I mean, we had more than 25 days, every day, more than 40 degrees of Celsius. This is crazy. I mean, even the soil, it's so dry that allows the fire to travel faster. Maybe this is a very simplistic way to explain it, but if there is no humidity in the air, it's very difficult to deal with a fire. So this is one example. What other? All these different phenomena that we have with the weather, physicists try to showcase that it is a correlated result of global warming. So they try to show how air is traveling differently in the Atlantic Ocean and how this affects the whole European weather forecast. And they have concrete results which are very difficult to explain because they change every year. So they see that the air changes changes from how it used to work up until a certain point. And now that the air gets warmer and warmer, we experience different weather phenomena in Europe and in the east coast of the US, where these snowfalls and storms are much worse than they used to be.
But I wanted precisely to ask you something about that, because according to the International Natural Disasters Database, more than 30% of all natural disasters in Europe in the last 120 years occurred in the Balkans region. Are we now to think that we are affected more by climate changes than other regions of Europe and the world? And if yes, how can we explain this?
Thanks. The Mediterranean is supposed to be a hotspot for climate change. This means that whatever effects of climate change take place on Earth, in the Mediterranean region, we experience them more strongly. Southeast Europe is part of the Mediterranean. The biggest part of Southeast Europe is part of the Mediterranean. So maybe this can be one explanation. Moreover, I think, and this is the last couple of years, I have started reading on Southeast Europe and climate change effects or policies. The problem is that we don't have that data. I mean, we do have data that show the disasters or whatever, but the problem is that we don't have policy data or policy tools to. There are no efforts to combat climate change in Southeast Europe, and maybe this is also an explanation of why we experience harsher effects of climate change or disasters in general in Southeast Europe. One of the main problems now that we know what the challenge is, let's say climate change, we know the reason, greenhouse gas emissions. We know what we need to do in order to mitigate these emissions, but we don't do anything yet to adapt to these changes that we experience.
You know, how would you suggest, what would be the way exactly to prevent these disasters? You know, maybe through having more information, more regional cooperation in our region, this could certainly help, I imagine.
Definitely. And I mean, I think this is what we need to start doing. I mean, especially in an attempt to combat a problem that cannot be tackled within national borders, we need to start cooperating with each other, and especially with our region. I think this goes without saying. Secondly, we have to start implementing climate policies. We have a huge list of climate policy tools, and in the international level, at the European level, at the regional levels, at national levels, at local levels, but their implementation is not sufficient. So, or is not taking place at all. So what we have to start doing is taking very seriously climate change as a threat, because unfortunately, this is the way we understand that we have to do something about it. If we don't perceive climate change as a threat, we will continue business as usual, doing nothing. And of course, we will experience changes. I mean, I always use this example. Athens this year had 45 degrees some days. When it has 50 degrees during summer, who is going to be able to live in Athens? So we're going to fling away. We have to find ways to make our cities or where we live livable, and we have also to find ways to see what we are going to do when we don't have a choice. So this is something that I think we need to be prepared. There is a lot of research on those kind of scenario, but for the time being, national governments do not seem to take them seriously into account. They say a lot that we do things, we do and we do and we do, but when the time comes to check whether they do or they don't, they usually don't. And this is also sorry, just to add this, that we have cooperative activities between states, where every time the first topic of discussion is climate change, and then they go, I mean, they say that climate change, of course, is very important and we need to do something, and then they turn the second page and the agenda changes completely, and when the meeting ends, no one remembers that they need to do something about climate change.
I will ask you about this climate diplomacy, because it's your narrow area of expertise, and but I wanted maybe to reflect on something that you said, talking about Athens and the extremely high temperatures. What will we do if the temperature is 50 degrees during the summer? The other day I was looking at some heat maps of Belgrade, and I saw that, for example, in a very narrow area, you have differences in degrees Celsius of maybe +5. And what you could determine is the main difference. For example, I was struck that one area of one street was 5 degrees cooler than the other. And I thought it was a mistake. In fact, it was not. It was the botanical gardens of Belgrade. And I think then you open an entirely different can of worms, which is urbanism, city, different models of city development. So I think many things need to change in order, to get us there where we need to be.
Yes, that's true. Let me say something here. That's very true. I mean, we need more green in our cities. The problem with more green is that we also have to water it. And now the new challenge that comes very fast on the agenda is water scarcity. And what are we going to do? I mean, how we are going to combat climate change, to adapt to climate change, if we have to plant more trees or botanical gardens or whatever, and then we don't have the water to water them. I mean, this is counterproductive, and I don't, for now, I don't see the solution by using green spaces in places like southeastern Europe that is not very green by itself. I mean, okay, we do have the mountains and the etc., but in our cities we are not green, and the temperatures are very high, so that's why we don't have so many trees, let's say.
Yes. So in your work, as we mentioned, you focus a lot on EU climate diplomacy. We know that the Paris Agreement set long-term goals to all nations to reduce global greenhouse emissions and to hold the global temperature increase to below 2%, above pre-industrial levels. So that would presumably significantly reduce the risks and impacts of climate change. So we talked about our region, but and some countries are already in the EU, but others are not. But talking about the EU generally, what are the EU's efforts in this regard?
Yes, thank you for this question. So the EU maybe is the only international actor that has managed to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. Is this enough? Definitely no, because I mean, if only the EU reduces and the others increase their emissions, there is no reason. I mean, of course, there is reason for us to reducing, because it makes our energy mix better and more sustainable, let's say. But overall, the problem will continue grow. So what? Are there any, I don't know, are there any solutions to this? I'm not sure yet. The way the international climate system or regime has been built so far is very much based on states and states' interests and national interests, whatever national interests mean. So when the time comes and the state representatives have to negotiate on climate measures, they negotiate up until a point that it will not affect their interests. So we see there is the caveat of not actually having a top-down approach that would allow us to solve the problem. And again, Paris Agreement is, I think it's a really, let's say, successful document and a successful legal document that asks and puts pressure on all states around the world to do something about climate change. But it doesn't only speak about mitigation, but also about adaptation. And for me, this is how states told the international community that they failed to mitigate, so we have to start adapting to climate change. So I'm not sure. And coming back to the EU, the European Union is doing as much as possible. Let's see how it will go now with the new European Commission and the new European Parliament, that they are not very green, as it shows, at least for now. But until now, it was the only actor, as I already told you, that was doing sufficient stuff and policies or legal acts or activities that were trying to combat climate change and to adapt to climate change. We are not, I mean, although the EU is the actor that is definitely a front runner on the subject, it still is quite behind on what it should have been doing rather than what it does.
Maybe to ask you something about that, because since the European Green Deal has been approved in the previous European Commission, different measures in energy and environmental legislation were implemented. And then what we had now is the European Parliament elections, and that saw the Parliament further tilt to the right. Do you think that opposition voices to these climate efforts will prevail? And what is the future of the European Green Deal in this new political atmosphere?
Yes. So I think that climate policy and environmental policy in general are very well embedded on how the European Union works. So I think the institutional reflexes on attempts to stop climate action will be quite strong. So we will see European climate policy continue growing and expanding in other fields, as well, and trying to implement what the European Green Deal introduced. Of course, it will be an opposition. I mean, there was always opposition on the European Green Deal. We have, for example, France, that had all these huge protests against climate measures that the president posed, maybe not in the right way, but I mean, they tried to show that this is a climate measure, but this was not how it was perceived from the society. So this is also a problem, how you communicate climate measures and climate efforts. But I think that to answer the question and to say again my belief is that the European Union will continue doing things on climate change, maybe not as strongly as it did in the previous term, but it will continue trying to implement its climate policy, which might be also better for climate change in general, because we don't need new policies, we need to implement the policies that we already have. And we are not implementing them. So let's see if now that maybe no new policies go through, they will be able to implement the already adopted policies. A positive note in a very pessimistic discussion.
Positive way of looking at things, of course. Now maybe to go on, and because we live in the world where we have practically, a war, a fully fledged conventional war at less than 1,000 kilometers from our borders, talking about Serbia, for example, and Greece is not very far either from Ukraine. And when we talk about this, did Russian aggression against Ukraine have an impact on the increase of climate skepticism due to rising energy costs and inflation overall? What do you think? Because when we talk about these political dynamics in Europe, we cannot overlook the war.
Mm-hmm. So I think, to be honest, I think it actually did the opposite. Climate policies, especially in Europe, because of the war, got a boost. And the reason is that, especially in the energy field, the reason is that they understood that if we move faster towards renewable energy, and we don't need Russian oil or whatever oil. I mean, it's not only Russia; it's also from we get oil from other countries as well. We are going to be energy efficient without needing third parties in this mix. So I think this was the initial understanding. The problem here is, of course, that the reality is not exactly, it doesn't go this way. So we were not, and we are not yet ready to have renewable energy in our energy mix and be completely, and not needing oil from third parties. Or natural gas or whatever. So the practicalities are very difficult, but I think that this war, and from now on every war, let's hope we don't have more, but who knows, will show that if you expect from someone to give you something, this is going to be a tool of the wars taking place. So I think it gave a boost to the European climate aspirations that we actually need to stop to stop buying natural gas or oil from Russia or whoever.
Mm-hmm. I understand. Maybe one question for the end about your recently published book, EU Climate Diplomacy Towards the International Maritime Organization and the International Civil Aviation Organization, because we cannot deny the fact that transport is one of the sources of green gas emissions. But I wanted to ask you, what is so specific about maritime transport, or in fact, shipping and air transport, if we look at it as well?
Thank you for this question. So, of course, I mean, shipping and aviation are human activities, and of course, they emit greenhouse gas emissions. The reason for this, the idea behind this research when it started in 2018 was that shipping and aviation were the only two human activities that they were not regulated on their emissions. So all human activities around the world were being regulated under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, as it is known, except from aviation and shipping. So in 2015, when the Paris Agreement was adopted, there was a huge pressure put on the International Maritime Organization and the International Civil Aviation Organization to adopt climate agreements, for them to adopt the climate agreement. So again, they were not going to be regulated under the UNFCCC, but they were going to regulate shipping and aviation respectively on their own. And this is what actually happened. As we said, because the European Union is a front runner and a leader in climate diplomacy and climate negotiations around the world, put a lot of pressure on the two organizations to adopt these agreements that they were adopted in 2016 and 2018 respectively. But also having, of course, I mean, diplomacy and negotiations need allies. So, of course, the European Union was working with others that they believed that it's better for these organizations to regulate greenhouse gas emissions from shipping and aviation. But let me say this, that again, the European Union seems to be, at least today, seems to be the only actor to actually trying to implement those kind of these agreements actually, while no one else shows the interest to do it. So again, this is a huge problem. I mean, if the European Union manages to reduce emissions from shipping and aviation, what is going on? What is going to happen if no one else does the same? And for example, and I'm closing with this, India and China, India's and China's population is growing, and they are also getting richer and richer, and they will start actually flying more and more, for example. So emissions from aviation are expected to grow significantly during the next years because, of course, a huge number of people will start flying. So what are the prospects and what do we expect from this? No one knows. We'll see. And unfortunately, alternative fuels are not ready yet. And I don't think that they will be ready when in need.
Yes, it's very many things to worry in this respect. I wouldn't like to end on a negative note, but sometimes all efforts to combat climate change seem to me like grasping at the straws. And I always remember the degrowth literature that I read at the beginning of the 2000s that, of course, socially seems very extreme, but, it begs the question to really rethink the way in which our world functions. George, this was very inspiring, and thank you very much for talking to the Lighthouse podcast. And yes, and thank you. We will end.